Hi guys, welcome back to Sacred Vedic Astrology. I hope you guys are doing so well. We do have a lot of retrograde energy going on astrologically right now, so don't be surprised if you're going through a little bit of a personal rebrand right now. That's really the sort of verbiage I keep using, and I keep joking around with like my friends. I'm like, I'm going through a rebrand, XX, talk to me next month. Um, but that's truly the energy of December. We're going internal, we're going into a more reflective space to really up level ourselves and upgrade ourselves before this new year. And I feel really good. I feel like in a really good solid energy, and I feel so excited for the new year and all the blessings that are going to come. So I actually am one of those kind of strange people that really enjoys retrograde periods, maybe because I love to just rebrand and review and revise, and I love to just really go into the past and see how I can improve things. Maybe that's because I'm a Sun, Rahu, and Virgo person. All my Virgo energy is coming out. But one of my favorite things in this life is to review and revise and improve. I feel like that's what I'm always really interested in this life, which is why I'm really interested in astrology, is because you can't improve something until you understand it, right? So we can't improve ourselves until we understand ourselves, right? And through astrology, it's a modality of self-realization, essentially. So when you understand yourself, you understand your patterns, you understand your psychology, you understand your strengths, you understand your weaknesses, then you can review and revise and improve on your strengths, your weaknesses, your patterns, your karma, etc. All right? So we're in this very retrograde heavy energy for December, which I quite personally like because I feel like it helps us to look at patterns and look at things that we need to change and improve before going into the new year. So if you're feeling kind of more introspective, more tired, Mars is retrograde, if you're kind of looking at the past to revise things and then go forward, that's really the energy of December. So you're doing the right thing if you're doing those things, all right? I thought that today we could do a really fun chart analysis on Pablo Picasso, who was one of our most famous artists of our time period, right? And he was really innovative. He was very inventive with his creative talents. And he was also quite the womanizer. He had a lot of issues with women, which we can see with his debilitated Venus, which we'll get into. We'll get into all of that, right? And I have a lot to say about a debilitated Venus because I've kind of been doing my own studies in astrology. I'm always kind of doing my own studies on the side, but something I've been kind of tracking as I'm going through different charts in culture is that a lot of really famous artists have a debilitated Venus, which is counterintuitive, right? And even people in my own life, I've known about, off the top of my head, personally, I've known 4 artists who have a debilitated Venus. Like in my personal life, people that I've known, and they're really talented artists, and they end up having a debilitated Venus, which is really counterintuitive, but we'll get into it. But also, interestingly enough, they all happen to be men that I know, and they have that debilitated Venus, and they all have a lot of struggles with women in this lifetime. So they're artistic and creative, but they have a lot of issues with women, which is how I have found that debilitated Venus to manifest. We'll get into that more in this video, but we're going to go into an in-depth analysis of Pablo Picasso, his life story, why he was so gifted with the arts, why he was so innovative, why he was so inventive, why he was so passionate, why he had all these love affairs. That is absolutely going to be a debilitated Venus with an aspect from Mars, 100%. So we're going to get into all that. And we're also going to go into a method of Vedic astrology analysis, which is understanding benefic versus malefic influence on a house. Okay, so one of my favorite personal Vedic astrologers and someone who has taught me astrology in this lifetime, and I'm so grateful for him as a guide, as a teacher, is James Braha, who is truly like the OG of Vedic astrology in the Western world. He is truly amazing. And when I learned from him, something he really drilled into us as students of Jyotisha was that to be a good astrologer, you have to understand how many benefics versus how many malefics are influencing a house. And if you don't know how to do that, you don't know how to do astrology, okay? So I'm going to bring that point home in this video. We're going to really analyze benefic versus malefic influence on houses through the astrological charts. All right, so I kind of want to honor James Braha because he is one of my teachers and I love him so much. He's, just such an amazing Vedic astrologer, and he works with a lot of integrity, and he works in a way where he's very just scientifically approaching astrology, and he just wants it to work. He just wants astrology to work, and that's how I am too. I just want astrology to work. That's all I want. I don't care so much about the scripture and the this and the that. I respect all of that so much, and I read all of that as a Vedic astrologer, but I really just want to use techniques that work. All right, so we're going to do that and take that into this chart analysis today, and this is one of my personal favorite chart analysis videos that I've actually ever done, so I really hope you guys enjoy this and have fun following along. So let's get right into it, and let's pull up the infamous Picasso's Vedic Sidereal Astrological Charts. All right, guys, so here we have Pablo Picasso's Vedic astrological chart pulled up, and all right, if you guys are like novice astrologers, maybe this isn't the first place you're gonna look, but if you know a little bit about astrology, you're gonna go and start seeing that fifth house really active and go, oh, okay, I see what's going on, right? Because the fifth house is the house of creativity and the arts, and his fifth house is active with 3 planets. I mean, Rahu we don't really see as a planet. It's a shadowy graha, so it's, the ecliptic of the moon, but just for explanation's sake, I'm going to say Rahu is a quote-unquote planet in this aspect, right? So we see 3 planetary energies in that fifth house of creativity. And then we also see Venus in the 3rd house, which the 3rd house and the 5th house are the 2 houses we're looking for creativity in the astrological chart, right? 5th house, 3rd house. And if we have connections between the 3rd house and the 5th house, then we really have a strong chart for the arts. And if we have benefic influence on the 5th house, then we really have something strong for the arts, okay? So that's just something that you can see right off the bat. But let's go into just kind of, analyzing this slowly and starting with the ascendant. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but you can open this chart and right away see, oh, we have all that planetary energy in the 5th house. We have Venus, the great benefic, in the 3rd house. Yes, it's debilitated, but we'll get into that. All right, so Picasso was a Cancer ascendant. I've seen so many charts of celebrities where they are Cancer ascendants or Cancer lagnas, and sort of the theory that I came to was perhaps it's because they're ruled by the moon. So they're ruled by the masses, right? And the moon shows fame. It indicates being seen in the public eye, in media, things of that nature. So, that's just my own theory on why there are so many celebrities with a Cancer ascendant. But, who knows? Who knows? So Cancer lagna, Cancer ascendant means his whole chart is ruled by the moon or Chandra. Okay, so where does his moon go? It goes into the 5th house of Scorpio. So is it a debilitated moon? Yes. Is it with a benefic? Yes. Is it with Rahu, which when Rahu comes together with other benefics, it causes power, it causes potency, it causes strength. Yes. And do we see that Jupiter is directly opposing to benefics in the 5th house? Yes. So we see a debilitated, moon in the 5th house, but we have to start weighing out these other factors of, okay, Mercury's there, Mercury's a benefic. Okay, moon is a natural benefic. Okay, Jupiter is aspecting the 5th house, which is a powerful and really potent benefic. Okay, so if we see it like this, we're going to say 1, 2, 3 benefics sit in the 5th house, okay? If you have 2 benefics in a house, you have a really strong house. If you have 3 benefics in a house or aspecting a house, you have a really, really strong house. So is his moon debilitated in Scorpio? Yes. But because we have that aspect of 3 really strong benefic energies onto that 5th house, it's actually a really powerful 5th house. And the next reason why his 5th house is so powerful and potent is because his 5th house lord is Yogakaraka for Cancer ascendant, okay? So not every ascendant gets Yogakaraka, but Cancer ascendant does happen to get Yogakaraka because Mars is the Yogakaraka planet because it rules 2 benefic houses, okay? So we have 3 benefic influence on that 5th house. And then we have the 5th house lord go into the 12th house, but it's Yogakaraka. So Mars is Yogakaraka. So it means that his 5th house is ruled by a very, very strong planet for Cancer ascendant, all right? So it's like we kind of have this energy of like 4 powerful or benefic influence onto that 5th house of the arts, right? And because his 1st house lord goes into the 5th house, it shows that his whole life is about 5th house themes, right? His whole chart is getting ruled by 5th house themes. 5th house is creativity, 5th house is the arts, 5th house is also children. Okay, and get this, okay? Just take this in for a second. We have 3 benefic planets in aspect to his 5th house, and he had 4 children. He had 4 children, okay? You can actually start understanding how many children someone can have by how many planets are in a house. So we would look at this, okay, there's 3 planets in the 5th, he might have 3 children. But then we see that Jupiter influence also on the 5th house. So he had 4 children, all right? So when people have a heavy 5th house, and if they have benefic influence on that 5th house, they can have a lot of children, best believe it. All right, so his whole chart is ruled by that 5th house of creativity with a lot of benefic influence on that 5th house. So a novice Vedic astrologer might look into his 5th house and go, oh, he has a debilitated moon in the 5th house. This is a weak 5th house. No, we have to start understanding other benefic influence and aspect. We have Jupiter directly opposing that 5th house, right? We have Jupiter on Mercury, 2 benefics in a 1-degree orb of conjunction onto that 5th house. All right, so we have a lot of strong planetary influence onto that 5th house of the arts, creativity, and children. And he had a lot of children. He was one of the most famous artists of our time period. He was insanely creative, very inventive, very innovative. That's that 1st house lord in the 5th house, with 3 planets in the 5th and 3 planets that are benefic giving aspect onto that house, okay? And Jupiter does naturally connect to the 5th house. So because Jupiter is directly opposing that 5th house, it's like a house that Jupiter is already very connected to. We see a lot of power and potency in this 5th house. So his 1st house lord is really strong and powerful and potent for the arts, okay? Now, let's start breaking down a little bit of the planetary energy that sits in that 5th house, right? He has the moon. He has Rahu in a very tight conjunction. So we see the moon is at 16 degrees, Rahu's at 17 degrees. That's a very tight aspect of a conjunction. So Rahu with the moon gives very out-of-the-box, creative, inventive ideas, okay? So it's in that 5th house of the mind and the intellect and the arts and the creative. So to see that we have Rahu together with Moon, and Mercury's there as well too, which Mercury is naturally, kind of indicative of the mind and intellect. We see a very strong energy for an innovative mind in connection to creativity, all right? He was always thinking of creative ideas, guys. I can guarantee that with Mercury, Moon, and Rahu in the 5th house of the mind, with Jupiter aspecting all those planets, Jupiter is just expanding all of that energy, okay? So it's as if he was constantly thinking about creativity. He was constantly obsessing about creativity. He was constantly coming up with new creative ideas. That is Rahu moon in a 1-degree orb of conjunction. That is Jupiter aspecting the moon. That is Jupiter aspecting Mercury. That is Jupiter aspecting Rahu in the 5th house of the arts. Best believe it. All right. Rahu moon also is said to give people kind of emotional extremes and kind of weird, they have weird thoughts. They can come up with really strange ideas, okay? And his art was very, it was innovative. It's not like he was just making these like, oh, he's just doing this sort of traditional sort of artwork. It was very out there. It was very innovative. It was very inventive. It was very ahead of its time, right? That's Rahu. Rahu is the future. Okay, when people have Rahu with the moon, they come up with really creative, really inventive, really innovative ideas that project things into the future. All right, you'll find when people have Ketu moon, they can be very focused on like the past. They can be very focused on how things have always been done. They can be kind of rigid with their thoughts and their emotions and their processing. When people have Rahu with the moon, it's the opposite of that. They're always wanting to, think of some out of the box idea. They're always wanting to project things into the future. They're always wanting to innovate. They're always wanting to invent. They're up late, Rahu, Moon, Mercury. I can guarantee you guys he was up all night at times coming up with really crazy creative ideas. That's Rahu, Moon, Mercury, all in that fifth house of the mind and the intellect and the creative and children. He also had a lot of children, right? There's like all this energy active in his fifth house, best believe it. So Moon, Mercury aspects can also give a lot of overthinking, a lot of being in his head. So, I didn't read this anywhere, and you guys can kind of fact check this for me, but with Jupiter on Mercury, with Jupiter on that fifth house, with Rahu Moon, Rahu Mercury, Moon Mercury, he was definitely an overthinker. Like he would obsess over things. He would get really obsessive about things, okay? Rahu with the moon gives an obsessive personality. It gives obsessive thoughts. It gives a person who is really obsessive about things. And it's also in Scorpio, right? So, I'm sure he channeled a lot of that obsessive nature into his art. He was probably very particular about things when it came to his artwork. He probably would get in these like creative, moods, and it was very all about this one thing. And actually this just came to me right now. He would go through these periods, right? He would have like his blue period. He would have like this period in his art. That's Rahu moon, okay? It's like going through these obsessive emotional stages of life where they get so obsessed with things and it's all about one thing, okay? Rahu moon, he would go through his blue period and he was obsessed with this one way of creating art and he was in this one period, right? That is what I am talking about, okay? And Jupiter on the moon is a pretty benefic aspect. Jupiter moon gives luck, it gives protection, it gives good energy to that house. And it's in the fifth house of the creative, right? And his Jupiter is in the 11th house. Yes, it's retrograde, but it's Jupiter. Jupiter is still going to be strong, retrograde or not retrograde. It's in his 11th house of financial gains, okay? So we see a lot of good energy with that Jupiter aspect onto the moon, onto Mercury, onto Rahu in the fifth house. Like, this is so much power in the fifth house, guys. And this is why I'm saying it's so important to understand how to analyze benefic versus malefic aspects onto houses. Because if I just looked at this chart, oh, he has a debilitated moon in the fifth house, he's going to have issues with children, he's going to have issues with creativity. No, this was one of our most notorious artists of our lifetime who had 4 children. Like, do you see how important it is to actually understand how to read Vedic astrology? We have to understand benefic versus malefic influence, and I hope this can show you guys as sort of a lesson on that and how important that is, okay? All right. So Jupiter onto that fifth house. This is a potent fifth house. He was always thinking about art. He was always creating. He had 4 children. He was obsessed with art. He was really gifted with all the fifth house themes, all right? Was he probably a little kooky at times? Yes. I mean, I've never met an artist who wasn't a little bit strange. This is kind of a fun personal fact, but I grew up around a lot of artists because my dad was a photographer, so his whole life he was a freelance photographer. And I grew up around a lot of eclectic, artistic people. I have, a lot of artistic stuff in my own personal chart as well too. And something you'll find is that artists, like true artists, are always very, very strange in the way that they process and view things, and they see the world in a different sort of lens. And when you see like charts of artists and you see Jupiter on Mercury, you see Mercury moon, you see Mercury Rahu, you see Rahu moon, yeah, they're strange, okay? They have strange ideas and strange ways of viewing things, but that's what makes them so creative, right? So Rahu is just something that's strange. Rahu is something that's future oriented. Rahu is something that's different. So he was always having these interesting creative ideas that were out of the box, innovative, creative, unorthodox, all of that sort of stuff. All right. So that's that really powerful fifth house. And then we also see that his fifth house lord goes into the 12th house. So Scorpio is ruled by Mars, right? And so that's like the fifth house is getting disposited back by this Mars in the 12th house. So what I find really, really interesting, because I was kind of wondering, what is all this 12th house energy, right? Because for Cancer ascendant, Mars is Yogakaraka, goes into its 12th house, and then also fifth house lord of creativity goes into the 12th house. So Mars is a malefic, yes, but it becomes Yogakaraka for Cancer ascendant, so it actually becomes more of a benefic, positive planet for the chart, okay? 12th house is foreign lands and foreign travels and going to different countries, and Picasso started getting his best creative ideas when he moved away from Spain and when he went to Paris, okay? That's that 12th house of foreign lands and different cultures. So he got motivated, he got inspired by his art, because Mars goes 1, 2, 3, 4, aspecting Venus, which we'll get into in a second. He got creatively inspired in foreign lands and when he had a move to a different country. Okay, that is Mars Yogakaraka in the 12th house of foreign lands. That is the fifth house of creativity disposited into the 12th house of foreign lands. He quite literally got his fame and started really building his creative career where it got to more heightened fame and heightened places when he moved abroad, when he moved to a different country. And I believe that it said that he never even went back to Spain once he left and went to Europe. He never really went back to his homeland. So that's Yogakaraka in the 12th house. That's Mars aspect on Venus in the 12th house. That's the fifth house lord in the 12th house. Okay. So his fame and his creativity heightened and got really, really inspired when he left to 12th house, a foreign land and a different culture. Best believe it. All right, so then we see Mars having its aspect onto Venus, because Mars goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So Mars is aspecting his Venus, and it's also aspecting his 7th house, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is giving us Kuja dosha, which we'll get into in a second, okay? Because yes, we can see all his relationship issues in the chart, best believe it. We'll get into that in a second. All his womanizing ways, all his mistresses, yes, we can see it. But let's start with the fact that Mars is aspecting Venus. Okay, Mars is Yogakaraka, gives it some strength. Is Mars a malefic? Yes, but when Mars aspects Venus, it creates creativity. It creates creativity. That's a funny phrasing of that. But Mars energizes, and Venus is the karaka, or the indication of creativity. So when we get Mars onto Venus, whether it's a conjunction, whether it's an aspect by 4-8, special aspect, we get artists, we get creative people, and we get people who like to have aggressive, passionate, hands-on relationships, which we'll get to as well in a second, because he was known to be a little bit abusive in his relationships. That's Kuja dosha, when Kuja dosha goes wrong, which we'll get into. But let's start with the positive of Mars aspect on Venus, okay? Mars-Venus gives creativity, it gives passion. I've said this in a video before where I did an analysis into the Venus-Mars aspect. And I always tell people, I always tell clients, when you have Mars with Venus, Venus with Mars, everything you do in this lifetime has to feel passionate. Everything. Doesn't matter what it is. Everything. Okay? And the reason why people get in trouble with the Venus-Mars aspect is because they want so much passion that they fall into their passionate whims, right? Venus-Mars is great for an artist, okay? They get lost in their passion. They get lost in their creativity. They get lost in their whims of passion, and they channel it into creativity. That's great. That's all good and well and all of that, right? Does it do someone favors in relationships? No, absolutely not. Especially when it's aspecting a debilitated Venus, okay? All right, so Mars on Venus, he's passionate, he's creative, he wants to live his whole life in a way that's passionate. He wants to have mistresses because he's so passionate, right? But then we also see that Mars is aspecting a debilitated Venus in the third house of using the hands and writing and painting and creativity. So gives, good creative energy. It's in the Hasta Nakshatra. Hasta literally rules the hands, guys. It's in the third house of using the hands for creative talent. So yes, he was a painter. And he has Venus, the Karaka for creativity, in the Hasta Nakshatra, which means the hands in the third house of creativity and using the hands for creative talent. Yes, that's how spot on it is, okay? But because it is a debilitated Venus, it doesn't do favors with women. It doesn't do favors with relationships. So when I was researching more into his sort of life story, it said that he had complicated, okay, this is verbatim what it said online, guys. Picasso had complicated relationships with many of the women. He either revered them or abused them, and typically carried on romantic relationships with several women at the same time. He was married twice and had multiple mistresses, and it can be argued that his sexuality fueled his art. Verbatim, okay? Now, I mean, it makes me laugh because it's just so accurate. It's so accurate. It gives me chills. Okay. He had multiple mistresses. He was abusive. He felt like his passions fueled his art. Mars of passion is with Venus of creativity, fueled his passion and his arts. Mars is with Venus, creating a love of all things passionate, overdoing it with women in a debilitated Venus. Venus is quite literally women and the wife in males' charts, okay? That's it. That's the whole story right there. That's it right there, right? We don't need to necessarily even have a history lesson if we have Vedic astrology. We can know exactly how things were going on and going down. But it's good to bring up those, recorded truths to kind of validate astrology. I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever read because I'm like, this is literally it. But so that's that, right? And the thing is as well too with the debilitated Venus that I have found is I've seen it time and time again in males' charts where they are artists, okay? And I think the reason for that is because a debilitated Venus doesn't do any favors with women and relationships and with the wife, because in the male's chart, Venus is the wife, quite literally. And if they have other debilitated aspects, or if they have other issues with their 7th house, which he does, he has Kuja dosha, and he has his 7th house lord with a malefic with Saturn, okay? If we see multiple things pointing to relationship issues, and then we also see a debilitated Venus, which is the wife, does not do any favors for relationships, okay? Does it do favors for creativity? Yes, because we see Mars, Venus. Yes, because Venus, the Karaka for the arts, is in a house that is indicated of the arts as well too. Yes, it's in the nakshatra that rules the hands, which gives creative ability and talent with the hands. But it's still a debilitated Venus, and it's a debilitated Venus hit with one malefic, 1, 2, 3, 4. And, it's also a debilitated Venus that is showing the wife, and then we're also going to see Kuja dosha because Mars is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 aspecting his 7th house. So then we're getting Kuja dosha and we're getting malefic influence onto his 7th house. Okay, and then we're getting the 7th house lord go into the 10th house with Saturn, another malefic. So it's not like, oh, he just has a debilitated Venus, there's going to be issues with relationships. No, we're never going to look at something that simplistically, but we have one malefic planet aspecting, and then we have Kuja dosha, and then we have the 7th house lord with a malefic in the 10th house, okay? So there are issues with relationships, and he had a lot of issues with women, okay? I've also known a lot of people with a debilitated Venus, especially if there's a Mars aspect, where they get so obsessive about, finding the next best thing. They want all these women. They want everything to feel passionate all the time with that Mars on Venus, that they can't really just pick one, okay? That's how that goes. So yeah, that's his whole life story right there, isn't it? Very interesting. And something I also find interesting as well too is, that Venus debilitated does have an aspect onto the 9th house, right? So because Venus is in the 3rd, it's directly opposing his 9th house. So that's like, a natural 100% power opposition. And his father, right, the 9th house is the father. His father was an artist. So we see Venus throwing its aspect to the 9th house, which shows us that there is artistic, creative energy connected to the father. All right, that's that Venus aspect on the 9th in direct opposition, okay? So that's exactly who his father was. He was an artist, all right? Something I find interesting as well, too, about Picasso's chart is he does have Saturn in the 10th house, and then his 10th house lord gets disposited by the 12th. So again, his whole career picked up when he moved to a different land, a different culture. That's that 10th house lord in the 12th house. Also, I found this to be very, very strange, but very interesting. 10th house lord in the 12th house. 12th house rules sleep and dreams and kind of those more subconscious places. And when I was kind of reflecting on his art, I was noticing that there was all these images and all this imagery of like people sleeping. And there was like these images where there was like women and their eyes were closed and they were sleeping. And I was like, oh my God, like you can't even make this stuff up. It's so insane. But his 10th house of career goes into the 12th house of sleep and dreaming and that sort of sleep subconscious state as well too. So that's that 10th house lord disposited by the 12th house. He got his career fame when he moved to a different land, a different culture. And a lot of his artwork depicts women sleeping with their eyes closed. Okay, 10th house lord in the 12th house, best believe it. All right, very, very interesting. We also see Sun's aspect. So this is very interesting as well too. So Sun is the father, the karaka for the father. Saturn is the karaka for the father. We see Sun's aspect onto the 10th house with Saturn. And his father heavily influenced his career. Okay, 10th house is the house of career. Saturn is the karaka for career. Saturn's in the 10th house. Sun, which is another karaka for the father, is directly aspecting his 10th house of career. Okay? And his father was a really big influence on his career. That's all of that Saturn 10th house, Sun 10th house energy. And he also said that his father was like a teacher, okay? Jupiter can also be the karaka for the father. K2 is there. Jupiter with K2 shows there's like this teaching energy or some sort of past life karmic energy with the father. Jupiter, K2. Jupiter with K2 in the 11th is also very interesting because, you know, it's kind of this energy where there's also a lot of spirituality in this chart, okay? Jupiter with K2 is very spiritual. He sort of mastered understanding spiritual concepts, philosophical concepts in a past life. 12th house, Mars, Yoga Karaka in the 12th house, 10th house Lord in the 12th house. There's also this very spiritual sort of, you know, undertone to a lot of his artwork. And something I've found, and I mean, it's very correlated, right? Because here's sort of my theory on all of this. I've found that many artists' charts are also very spiritual charts. And why? Because the two things are intertwined, right? I see, this is my own philosophy, okay? I have a Jupiter Hamsa Yoga, so I'm always going to have a philosophy thrown in here. But my own philosophy on why this happens a lot, why a lot of artists have charts that are also very spiritually strong and spiritually heavy with like Moshka houses or Jupiter with K2 or, energy, 12th house energy that's very spiritual, is because, artistic talent is spiritually connected. It's innately there, right? Like, where does art come from? Again, this is my own philosophical musing, and this is just my personal belief on it, but I do think that like artists and art is the most divine thing that we have. I think that art comes from God. I think it comes from the divine. And so you'll find a lot of artists are maybe not traditionally spiritual, maybe not traditionally religious, but they are very in touch and in tune with the subconscious, right? Because you don't create art unless you are in tune and in touch with the deeper aspects of yourself and the deeper aspects of the universe, right? So you'll find a lot of charts where they're creative and they're, insanely, massively talented with the arts, that they're also very spiritually inclined in their chart as well, too. And the reason for that is because arts and spirituality goes hand in hand, right? You can't have one without the other. I think art is divine in itself, and it's one of the most like divine things that we have in this lifetime is art. It's truly the most sort of transcendental thing that exists, is that art, is that creativity. So, is it a coincidence that the word creativity is like creator, right? What is creator? Creator is God. Creativity is from the creator. I don't know. Again, this is my Jupiter in Sagittarius going on a philosophical rant. But I do truly believe that art and spirituality are directly intertwined and connected. So you'll find a lot of artists are just naturally very in touch with the divine because they have to be. That's how you create art. That's where art comes from. It comes from those divine places, and it comes from those subconscious places, right? So that's something that I've sort of unraveled in charts where I'm like, oh, they're so artistic. They're such a talented artist, but they're also very spiritual, question mark. Yeah, because it's the same thing, right? It's one in the same. All right. So that was Pablo Picasso's Vedic astrological chart. We see the power of his fifth house, a debilitated moon. Did he have issues with his mother? I'm sure he did, 100%, and that's probably also what caused issues with women, that debilitated Venus. He has a lot of issues with women in this chart. A debilitated Venus does not do favors with women for males' charts. Mars aspecting Venus, really creative, really passionate, but best believe it's overly passionate, so he wants to fall into his whims of passion. And then he wants to have two mistresses on the side that he's painting. That's how that goes about, all right? And Mars in the 12th gives Kujadosha in Vedic astrology. My thoughts on Kujadosha, because a lot of charts have Kujadosha, so it's not, it's one of those interesting concepts in astrology that I personally find to work very often, but it's also so popular that I'm always like, but my viewpoint and belief on Kujadosha in the chart is it will manifest if someone also has a lot of other malefic influence on their 7th house, on their 7th house ruler. If they have a malefic influence onto their Venus, which is the wife of the male's chart, then yes, we are going to see that Kujadosha cause more issues in relationships, right? And he was married multiple times. He was said to be abusive. I've said this in a video before. Mars with Venus can cause overly passionate energy that at the worst manifestation can cause abusive relationships, okay? That's Mars on a debilitated Venus. But again, just because it's debilitated doesn't mean that we don't have creative talent from that really strong 5th house. Remember, Jupiter is on the 5th, Mercury's there, Moon's there, Rahu's there. Rahu just heightens things. I don't find Rahu to be that malefic when it's with other benefics. I find it to just create power and potency in the chart. All right, so this was a in-depth chart analysis into Picasso, who was one of our most innovative, inventive artists of our time period. And I thought this was a really, really good chart analysis to understand benefic influence versus malefic influence, what caused all his, overly passionate issues in relationships, what caused the abuse in relationships, what caused issues with women. That's a debilitated Venus in a man's chart. Best believe it. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed and learned a lot from this video. That's all I really aim to do in these chart analysis videos. I want to show you guys, how powerful it is to understand Jyotisha and to really, know the principles, know the concepts, and know how things really do work in astrology. It's not about there's 3 planets in the 5th house. No, are they malefic planets? Are they benefic planets? Are the rulerships with malefics? Are they with the Yoga Karaka? There's so much complexity to Vedic astrology. It's one of the most complex things I've ever studied in my life. Truly, I remember when I first took a little look at Vedic astrology when I was maybe I was 15, maybe I was 14. And I was really obsessed with Western astrology. And my neighbor was a professional Vedic astrologer, and she would always come over and be like, I think, you're a Virgo, whatever. Anyways, and so because of that, I kind of took a little look at Vedic astrology one day when I was much younger, and it made my head literally hurt. It gave me a headache. The first time I looked at Vedic astrology, I was in pain. I was there is no way I'm ever gonna learn this system of astrology, so I'm just gonna not even engage in it. But the benefits and the reward that you get from actually knowing Vedic astrology because of how insanely complex, in-depth, accurate it is worth the headache that you get when you're trying to learn it and understand it. My Lord, I will never forget that day that I tried to look at Vedic astrology and I was like, oh my God, I'm literally in pain because this is hurting my mind. So it's a really intense system of astrology, but if you want to be a good, accurate astrologer, it's really the only system out there to use. All right, guys, I'm sending all the love, all the good vibes, all the good energy, and I hope you guys are enjoying this December and tying up some loose ends with all the retrograde energy. Definitely don't sign any crazy contracts right now, though. All right, I love y'all, and we'll talk soon with some new content. All right, bye, guys.